What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. It is Week 18. Some of you are celebrating a fantasy championship. Some of you are saying you're never playing fantasy football again. You're lying. You'll be back. Some of you are playing this week. So we have something for everyone. We've got Waiver Wire for Week 18, and we've got the top 5 at each position for 2026. So again, if you're not playing this week, don't worry. Plenty of content for you today. I'm Adam Aizer with Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg. And guys, finally you're doing the same thing. I've done this every week, and I think you guys have done it this week too. We've made all your waiver claims for Week 18 before today's show. Good job.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. Let that joke sit there. Let that joke sit there.
Good job, Dave.
There's a lot of work. Yeah. It's interesting that we don't play in anything for Week 18. We understand that having a championship in Week 18 is madness because so many teams, NFL teams, are going to rest their starters. Others might play their starters for a half or 3/4, and we just don't know. So it's really a bad week to try and determine who the best team is in a fantasy league. But that being said, I feel like we're kind of wasting this week, Adam. We should do something fun for Week 18. It could be a DFS showdown. It could be anything. But we should be doing something. It's our last week of a full NFL slate for a long, long time.
Oh yeah, let's do a DFS challenge.
Let's do it. I agree.
Send it to the audience.
I'm accepting for Jamey. I know he'll be in too.
I do DFS every week, so I'll be doing DFS again as always.
Look, it's the end of a year, so I think it's just time to kind of get things off our chests, right? Definitely not something that a host should say, a host of a fantasy football show. I'm going to say it anyway, everybody. I suck at DFS. I'm just not good at it. So yes, if we're doing a challenge, join it. You will be better than me. So there we go. Let's talk waiver wire here if we're playing in Week 18, and then the second half of each segment will be a look ahead. So we'll do our top 5 quarterbacks for 2026. But Dave, who are your top 3 overall priorities this week for those of us? And Jamey did a poll yesterday, and about 10%, I think, said they're still playing this week. So
I
there
did
are
the same
people out
poll.
there.
Yeah. Number 1 is Malik Davis with the Cowboys. It looks like Javonte Williams not going to play at running back for them. He had been ramping up his time and working alongside Javonte over the last couple of weeks. I thought he's looked pretty good. I think it's probably a combination of just fresh legs at this point in the season. Love the matchup against the Giants. So I think that he's somebody that fantasy managers who are looking for a burst at running back, he's a top 20 type of running back for this coming week. And then a couple of other wide receivers that are interesting. The first one is going to be Luther Burden. We're not 100% sure that he will end up playing in the game, but my goodness, what we saw from him in Week 17, a really good sign for his future. So I think that if he does end up playing, that's somebody that fantasy managers can get to and feel good about using in Week 18. And then the other receiver, it's not really a receiver, it's 2 tight ends. It's Jake Tonges with the 49ers. He had an awesome game, but if you can't get to him, or if you don't want to put him on your team because you're worried about George Kittle playing on Saturday, Michael Mayer of the Raiders, he's going to continue to see some meaningful targets in that terrible offense, but it's a huge opportunity for him in Week 18.
2 of the same guys that I'd go with, which would be Malik Davis. Obviously, you got to keep an eye on Javonte Williams with the 100-yard game that Davis just had against the Commanders. As Dave said, the matchup against the Giants is fantastic. Luther Burden sounds like he's going to be fine. Just looked absolutely electric in that game against San Francisco. Back-to-back games with over 14 PPR points. You go back to Week 15. Remember, he did not play in Week 16. Week 15, he did that in a half. So clearly right now he's clicking. And I don't even think it matters if Rome Odunze plays or not. I think you're going to start Luther Burden as at least a number 2 wide receiver without Rome Odunze. Luther Burden's number 1 wide receiver for this week, taking on Detroit. That defense is absolutely terrible right now. And then I'm going to go with the third receiver, another receiver as the third option. Parker Washington, back-to-back games with 10 targets. He's just been absolutely fantastic for Trevor Lawrence, who's playing out of his mind right now in the fantasy playoffs. Certainly in the last 6 games, he's been fantastic. And so I think you just look at what Parker Washington has done, really ascended to be the number 1 receiver for Jacksonville. Jacoby Myers tailed off a little bit the last 2 games. Obviously, Brian Thomas, we know what that season's been like for him. So Parker Washington coming into this matchup with the production that he's had, at least 19 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. Did it against Denver. I know we all said, oh, Riley Moss can't tackle. Will it happen again? It did. Against Indianapolis, he was even better. So I think you just look at Parker Washington right now as a number 2 wide receiver. You're starting Burden, you're starting Washington, and you're absolutely starting Malik Davis if there is no Javonte Williams.
Yeah, big increase in snaps for Parker Washington. Increase in production. Looking good there. All right, so let's talk about quarterbacks here, because if you have Josh Allen, he may not play. If you have Justin Herbert, he's already not going to play. If you have Matthew Stafford, there's a scenario where they're locked into their seed before they play on Sunday. So McVay said they're going to play their starters. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to play the entire game. So there are these scenarios where you could be in a little bit of trouble. There could be some teams like the Patriots who are blowing out the Dolphins potentially and pull their starters at some point in the second half. It's just speculation, of course. So let's see the waiver wire at quarterback and who we're looking at. And Jamey, it's going to be Tyler Shuck, who's on a nice little roll here. Not the best matchup. We're seeing the Falcons defense playing pretty well. Also, you have Bryce Young in a huge game, and you have Cam Ward in a less huge game, at least for the Titans. But that's your order. Shuck, Young, Ward. How much do you like Tyler Shuck this week?
He's a borderline starter. I liked him better last week taking on Tennessee. Much easier matchup. Like you said, Atlanta's playing fantastic right now. The last two quarterbacks that they've done well against, really last three quarterbacks they've done well against, Baker Mayfield, Jacoby Brissett, Matthew Stafford. We love Jacoby Brissett going into that game. I did. He was the start of the week for Week 16 and did not play well. Stafford, 3 interceptions. That looked bad. So you just got to keep that in mind with Shuck. And 6 of his last 7 games, 19 fantasy points or more. The one game where he didn't get that was against the Falcons. So not a slam dunk. I had the decision last week. If I was playing in Week 18 between Jared Goff and Tyler Shuck, I would go with Goff as long as Amon-Ra St. Brown is playing. So Shuck is a borderline starter. Bryce Young's matchup is fantastic. 8 quarterbacks in a row, 19 fantasy points or more against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're banged up in the secondary right now. Bryce Young was miserable last week, only 54 yards passing against Seattle. The game before, however, against Tampa Bay, 21 fantasy points. So he's going to be an option for you if you're desperate. And then Cam Ward, I hate the matchup. Jacksonville's been fantastic against quarterbacks, but 4 straight games with 2 touchdowns for Cam Ward. 3 straight games with 19 or more fantasy points. Last 2 over 20. So he's playing well. I think in the case of Shuck and potentially Cam Ward, you're looking for some fourth quarter production, because I think that will certainly be the case for Ward, especially if Jacksonville has that game in hand. They may start to pull some guys off the field if they know that they're going to be playing in the wild card round. So I don't love any of these guys as must-start options, but I do think Shuck is the closest, just outside the top 12.
And Dave, similar list for you. I think slightly different order.
Yeah, it's slightly different. I like Shuck as well. And I love the way that this whole Saints offense is playing. And it makes me wonder, if they had moved to Shuck earlier in the year, would the Saints be in the playoff conversation? I think they would be, because they've been playing so well. And that's on both sides of the ball. Shuck is number 1 for me. I would take Cam Ward second, because I like the way that he's been playing. I acknowledge the tough matchup for him, but I think it's even tougher for his running backs, and it's going to be really tough on his defense. It's going to force a game script where Cam Ward's going to throw a lot. And that's just something that we don't see a ton of from Bryce Young. And I've watched enough of this Bucs defense to know that they're cooked. They really did a bad job against the Dolphins run game last week. And I bet Carolina goes for the slow pace approach and they lean on their running backs. It wouldn't surprise me if Week 18, after all these weeks in a row, Rico Dowdle ends up with one of those big games that we were hoping for along the way. And that means Bryce Young won't have to do that much. So I get the matchup, and I think Bryce Young is an okay quarterback, but I've got Cam Ward just a little bit higher. I think he'll have better stats.
By the way, Dave, what does it say about your Twitter followers that 11% of them are playing in Week 18, according to your poll, and only 7% of Jamey's are?
It's interesting.
That is
pretty weird.
Well,
and Dave used some choice words for them. You said, how many of you sick, sick dogs?
What word did I use, Adam? I'm just wondering.
I don't remember. I can't read.
I can't read.
It's blurry. It's blurry. All right, let's look ahead to 2026 and our top 5 quarterbacks. First, Jay, your lists are fairly similar here. Josh Allen, number 1. Joe Burrow is top 3. Drake May is top 3. It's a little interesting after that, though. So Jamey's list is Josh Allen is QB1. This is 6 point per passing touchdown. Joe Burrow, 2. Drake May, 3. Matthew Stafford, 4. I think he's 12th for me. And Lamar Jackson, 5. And Dave, yours is a little bit different. But Jamey, go ahead and take us through your top 5 here.
I mean, Allen's going to repeat as QB1, depending on what happens in Week 18. But taking the 17-game fantasy season, he's going to be quarterback 1, just barely ahead of Matthew Stafford on a point-per-game basis. I think in the case of Joe Burrow, it's just a matter of him staying healthy. We know what the upside is. We saw it in 2024. And you see it at the end of this season as well. As long as he has those 2 receivers healthy, I still think the defense is going to be a work in progress. Joe Burrow is just special. So I have no worries about him as a top 5 quarterback when healthy. In the case of Drake May, we got to see what this receiving core looks like, because I think that's the biggest question mark. Will Stephon Diggs be back? How are they going to supplement, sort of replacing that potential and maybe adding to just giving him more weapons? Obviously, Matthew Stafford, you got to be concerned about the age. We'll see what happens with Devontae Adams. But in Sean McVay, I trust, and we saw what Stafford was capable of this year, and I brought this up on the podcast this morning. They're going to be playing a third-place schedule next year. Offensive line's still going to be good. I think you know what this offense is when Stafford's healthy. So as long as he comes into the season with maybe just a minor back injury, nothing serious, we saw what he's capable of this year, having an MVP season. And then in Lamar Jackson's case, you're always shooting for upside at this position. I think it's just the easiest way to go. Lamar Jackson still has as much upside as anybody in the world. I assume he's going to be back with Baltimore. We'll see how this season finishes. But look, you're going to have to deal with maybe some injuries. He's getting older. His play style is not exactly conducive to, lasting a long length of time. But we saw it 2 years ago, last year, 2024. He should have been the MVP of the NFL. He had a magnificent season, and he could easily get back to that level of play. So Lamar Jackson will still be a top 5 quarterback. That might be the one that I switch before we get to at least the start of putting these on the site, is Lamar Jackson at 4 and Stafford at 5.
Stafford, I had 12th because he has a 7.5% touchdown rate. It's just astronomical this year. He has the 3rd highest yards per attempt. And basically, if you're going to be a top 5 quarterback and not run the ball at all, you have to have the best season of your career. He's basically doing that. So I'm just not banking on history repeating itself. But it's a long way for him to be basically QB2 to fall to 12. I understand it's a pretty low drop in my rankings. Now, Dave, you do not have Stafford in your top 5. You have Allen, Drake May, Joe Burrow, ooh, fun, Jackson Dart, and Jaden Daniels. There's your top 5 for now.
And Allen makes sense. Jamey said it. He's going to finish north of 25 fantasy points per game. Brock Purdy might have more, but Purdy didn't play in nearly as many games as Josh Allen did. And it's really the finish of the year that's better for Purdy, worse for Josh Allen. I would imagine Buffalo will add a key wide receiver at some point in the next 6 months, and that will make Josh Allen an even better fantasy quarterback. And I think the Patriots might do the exact same thing. We already know that they're good at running back. Their offensive line's in pretty good shape for the future. Their defense will get a little bit stronger, but they should add another big-time wide receiver, and that'll make Drake May even better in 2026. The receivers are already great in Cincinnati. Jamey said it. It's an issue of health for Joe Burrow. And I'm not sure that defense is going to get better. One of the things that worked out for fantasy managers, and it does this every year, offenses with good players, good offensive line, terrible defense on the same team. It sets up for the same game script every single week. And I'm not sure Cincinnati's game script is going to change enough over the next 6 months based on their roster. So I think Joe Burrow is an outstanding quarterback. And now let's get to Jackson Dart. He's going to have Malik Neighbors back. This is a team that I think could really take a step forward on both sides of the ball. The offensive line played pretty well for the majority of the year. I know that there's going to be injury concerns with Jackson Dart, just as there will be with plenty of other quarterbacks. This is somebody who I think is still worth taking the chance on as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, because he can be even better when his receiving core isn't Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton and Theo Johnson. It's going to get better. Of course, it's contingent on Malik Neighbors' health, but if Neighbors goes back to being the guy that we knew as a rookie, holy cow, we could have a huge year on the ground and through the air from Mr. Jackson Dart.
All right, those are your top 5 quarterbacks. Set in stone. That list will not change from now through draft season. When we come back, is Malik Davis going to carry you to a championship if you're one of the 12% of people in Dave's Twitter feed that are playing in Week 18? Who else should you be adding at running back, and who are our top 6 running backs for next season? We'll be right back. Javonte Williams has a shoulder injury. Malik Davis has an opportunity. We don't know that Javonte won't play in this game, but we're thinking probably not. So Malik Davis at the Giants headlines a list of running backs. Jamey, as we look at the waiver wire running backs, Malik Davis is far and away the best one, right?
Without question, and that's assuming, again, Javonte Williams is out. Clearly, if Javonte Williams plays, then there's not really anybody I think you could say is a potential starter. There are some good flex options and some moving parts here. For example, with the Green Bay situation, we don't know exactly who is going to sit. Remember, they could decide that they want to play Jordan Love. He didn't play in Week 17. They want to give him some reps in Week 18, even against Minnesota. That makes Emmanuel Wilson that much better if he starts in place of Josh Jacobs. Remember, Wilson, when he faced Minnesota, had 28 carries, 100 yards, and 2 scores. So, he's already taken on this defense and had success against this. Dylan Sampson could be involved in the passing game like we thought he was going to be last week in a matchup against the Bengals, where they give up a lot of receptions to the position. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt could continue to be the lead running back for the Commanders. He's got 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games. So there's a lot of moving parts, I think, with the position. But Malik Davis, if he starts for Javonte Williams, you just saw it. 20 carries, 100 yards. Didn't do anything in the passing game, but he does have 3 touchdowns in the last 6 games. And so they've been using him in this supplemental role. Now he steps into the lead role potentially. And we know this Giants run defense, while better the last 2 games, still very vulnerable. So love the setup for Malik Davis. He's a top 15 running back for me. I'd start him over Trevion Henderson, for example. I'd start him over both Steelers running backs. There's just a lot of scenarios here where I think there's a huge opportunity for the Cowboys running back. And basically it's plug and play. If no Javonte, you almost treat Malik Davis the same way.
Okay. And who are some other running backs? Get to Dave in a minute here, but on your waiver wire column, got Dylan Sampson in there. Who else are you looking at as a potential Week 18 option?
Yeah, again, you look at Dylan Sampson, you look at Emmanuel Wilson, those 2 guys I think have good opportunities, potentially. In the case of Sampson, we know no Quinshon Judkins, did have 11 carries last week against Pittsburgh. Much tougher matchup last week than he has this week against Cincinnati. While their run defense has improved, I think what we didn't get last week, we get for Sampson this week, which is the role in the passing game. Because if I'm Cleveland, I want to see what Dylan Sampson can do. I don't want to see what Raheem Sanders can do. I don't want to see what Travion Williams can do. We don't know if Judkins is going to be there at the start of the season. You go back to week 1, I don't know how much of it was, Sampson not playing or practicing. He missed the last 2 games prior to last week with the hand injury, now fully healthy after playing in the game last week. So none of these guys are going to be starters. They're all flex options. But again, you look at Wilson, if there is no Jacobs, we don't know, again, who the Packers are going to rest. But I'll just reference it. Again, the same matchup earlier this season, Emmanuel Wilson, without Josh Jacobs on the field, was a stud against this Vikings run defense. So I like the opportunity to use him as a flex. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, 2 games in his last 3 with at least 11 carries. What did he do in those games? At least 96 rushing yards. He played Philadelphia 2 games ago. They didn't have Jalen Carter in that game, but he had a touchdown on the ground. He just doesn't have any work in the passing game. Last time he caught a pass was week 11. So you're really banking on him finding the end zone. And last week, no Chris Rodriguez against the Cowboys. He did well. Audric Estime's coming off a game where he had a 30-yard touchdown run at the end of the game in the 4th quarter. Will he have those opportunities against a really good run defense this week of Atlanta, the way that they've played lately? So I don't know how much of these guys are going to be considered starting options, but they're all in that flex play, except for Malik Davis, who could be an absolute stud.
Dave, I don't know. You want to give me some more? You want to give me your second favorite running back behind Davis, or you want to give me your top 5 running backs for 2026?
I want to give you both. And my second favorite running back behind Davis is Krosky-Merritt, just because of the breakaway speed that he has. It's not a good matchup at all. Jamie's right. He doesn't catch the ball at all. But I do think that he's probably the one who's in best position to maybe get close to 15 touches. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of Chris Rodriguez. It's the last game of the year. Commanders are evaluating talent too, and this is one of the players they need to evaluate. But I'm not excited about any of these running backs other than Malik Davis. And I just have to put it out there that in the 2 games prior to last week, tough matchups for Malik Davis, and he was in a limited role. Didn't even average 3 yards per carry. So you got to take a little bit of caution when it comes to Malik Davis, but it is a favorable matchup 2nd week in a row, and there's no question that if Javonte Williams is out, the opportunity will be there. So now, should we talk about next year? Should we move it forward to 2026 or what?
You should.
Let's do it. I am excited about this position, and my favorite running back for next year is Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. I think that he's going to absolutely crush it as the main running back without David Montgomery in Detroit, and that's the way that things seem to be leaning. Now, if Montgomery ends up being there, or if they acquire another running back who we know for sure will get in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 touches per week, play anywhere from 1/3 to 50% of the snaps, then I don't know if I can commit to Jahmyr Gibbs as the 101. And whoever would be at running back for me will be the 101 on my rank list. But for now, it's Jahmyr Gibbs. And keep in mind, the Lions, no playoffs this year. They're not going to have a first-place schedule. They're not even going to have a second-place schedule because the Packers also made the playoffs. I think that there's a huge opportunity for Gibbs to have a better year than Bijan Robinson, who himself is coming off of 22.7 PPR points per game. Just an absolute phenom at running back. Going to be really easy to click his name if you've got the first pick. It'll be even easier if you've got the second pick, and he's still on the board. Devon Achane is 3rd. He averaged over 20 PPR points per game. I think there will be some wholesale changes in Miami, but he won't be one of them. He'll still be the lead running back. Not sure that defense will be so much better where he loses targets in that offense. And then you saw Christian McCaffrey fourth. Adam, this dude's going to be 30, and he's going to be coming off of 400-plus touches. He's already at 399 with a week to play. And yet, I still think he's worth the first-round price tag at this point because he's just so good at what he does, and he's such a huge part of what the 49ers do. That's going to be contingent on how far the 49ers go in the playoffs and what they do at the position during the offseason, because they have to know that they can't count on Christian McCaffrey for this same type of workload year after year after year. And there's going to be a downswing, but for now, I'm still excited about him as a top 5 running back. And same thing with James Cook. I think that he continues to be a catalyst in that Buffalo offense. We know that he gets a ton of fantasy points every single week.
Okay. Jamey also has the same top 3. Very similar list. Same top 4, actually. Gibbs, Bijan, Achane, Christian McCaffrey. And then you have Jonathan Taylor 5th, whereas Dave had James Cook. And, Jamey, I'll just say McCaffrey to me next year, and I was so high. I love McCaffrey this year because I said, you can't predict injuries. I'm going to predict an injury next year. No, he's going to be like what Saquon Barkley was for you. You ranked him higher than you were willing to take him. And you were right with your instincts. I think, as a podcast, we were right. But you drove that ship. That's how I'm going to feel about McCaffrey. But here's your top 5. Go ahead, break it down.
Dave said it. We'll see how this season finishes for McCaffrey. If they are able to make another Super Bowl run, it'll be tough because we saw this 2 years ago. It was the exact same scenario. A ton of work, went to the playoffs, came back the next year, was not the same guy due to injury. And so a year older, it will definitely be tough to trust. I'm really torn right now between Gibbs and Bijan. The way that Bijan finished the season, it looks right now like Raheem Morris is going to be back for the Falcons because there was some questions about maybe that he was going to be fired. I think the way that they're finishing the season, they're going to give him the opportunity to come back. Who's going to be the quarterback? But really the driving force of this is Tyler Allgeier's a free agent. And so if they let Allgeier walk and they don't bring in somebody who's going to take Bijan off the field like we saw a little bit too much in the early part of the season, then even the middle part of the season, those goal line opportunities were going to Allgeier. That could have been Bijan getting all these touchdowns, and then I think it would have been a runaway that he's the best running back this season. What he does in the passing game is almost similar to Gibbs, if not better. I do think that we'll see somebody in tandem with Gibbs, and if you're just looking at it right now, like this offensive line is crumbling before our eyes for the Lions, which has been such a strength for what that team looks like. The offensive system right now, clearly not as good as it was a year ago without Ben Johnson. And so I may flip it and go Bijan 1 over Gibbs, but we'll see what happens in terms of who they're sharing the backfield with. But I think those are the easy top 2 guys. In the case of Jonathan Taylor, the thing that we saw this season when they had competent quarterback play to start the year, he was absolutely a monster. And this is another situation where they went from being the best team in their division to now being the 3rd best team in their division. So the schedule is going to be a little bit more favorable for them. Depending on who they get at quarterback is going to really determine, I think, how good Taylor could be. The best thing that we saw from him, especially during the Phillip Rivers starts, he got back involved in the passing game. We know that wasn't going to be the case with Anthony Richardson. We saw a little bit with Daniel Jones. If they can get a guy that's more just a pure pocket passer, that will help Jonathan Taylor, I think, immensely across the board. The offensive line was great at the start of the season. I think that unit comes back next year. So love the setup for Taylor. To me, he's a top 5 running back without question.
Okay, real quick before break. Guess who my RB4 is after Bijan, Gibbs, and Achane? It's nobody that we've seen. Who?
Cam Scattergood, of course.
Nope, but same class.
Oh, RJ Harvey?
Nope.
Oh,
Omarion Hampton.
Genty.
Omarion Hampton.
Wow.
Omarion Hampton in 9 games has 1 fewer catch than James Cook has in 16 games.
Yeah.
So we'll see what they do at RB2
He's
there.
up there for me too. I like that call, and that Chargers, we're talking about offensive lines. The Chargers offensive line is going to come back healthy. Whether they stay that way remains to be seen.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, when we come back healthy on Fantasy Football Today, wide receivers on the waiver wire for Week 18 and our top 5 at the position in 2026. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. Luther Burden coming on strong. Great game in Week 17. Please be healthy. Get out there, get on the field against the Lions, who give up the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers. Dave, even if we don't know his status when we're making our waiver claims, he's got to be the number one wide receiver, right?
Not the number one wide receiver, and if you're good at running back, he is your number one priority off the waiver wire as well, because he's getting so many great opportunities in a Chicago offense. We thought that DJ Moore would have a good game, and then when Luther Burden came back, I'll speak for myself, I thought that Burden had a little bit more upside. I ranked him just a little bit higher, and I'm glad that I did. And this week it's easy. Luther Burden over DJ Moore, whether Rome Odunze plays or not, just like Jamey said. And you just look at his numbers from the last 2 weeks. We're talking about 14-plus PPR points, 8-plus non-PPR points, and he's had 6 or more targets in 4 straight games. He's been building toward being the number one wide receiver in Chicago. And you mentioned that the Detroit secondary, absolutely terrible. Their pass rush really hasn't been as good. The whole defense is falling apart for Detroit. And here's one other fun wrinkle. Caleb Williams is 271 yards away from being the first Chicago Bears passer with over 4,000 yards ever. Think how long the Chicago Bears have been around. They've never had a 4,000-yard passer. This is a week where they can do it. This is the matchup they can do it. The weather needs to hold up, but Luther Burden can have a big hand in that. I think that he is absolutely a must-start type of fantasy receiver you can pick up off the waiver wire right now.
Jamey, if we can't get Luther Burden, who else should we look at?
I mean, Parker Washington's on an amazing roll right now. You know, the last 2 games have been fantastic. You look at the game against Denver, I know we said, okay, Riley Moss can't tackle, and it was Patrick Surtain taking away Brian Thomas. Well, maybe they get Thomas going in the Week 17 game against the Colts, and Jacoby Myers has been sort of a very steady presence for them since being acquired in the trade from the Raiders. Parker Washington the last 2 weeks has been their best receiver. He might be their best receiver to close the season. He might be their best receiver next year if they move on from Brian Thomas, which is something that you're hearing, that they may be trying to trade him because they don't think that he is going to live up to the expectations that we saw as a rookie and still getting something great in return. That's how good Parker Washington has been right now. Trevor Lawrence is dialed in with Parker Washington. I think Liam Cohen loves what Washington does. So what he's accomplished the last 2 weeks, over 19 PPR points each of the last 2 games. In this week's matchup, I think he's going to have another opportunity against the Titans defense that has been absolutely terrible at stopping wide receivers. Parker Washington's a top 20 wide receiver in Week 18.
Do you think it really should count for Caleb Williams if he needs 17 games to do it? Most of the guys are 16 games.
I mean, way back in the day, they used to play 12 games, and
it
was really, really hard to do. Yeah, it counts. Let it count. Especially for people that have Luther Burden in their fantasy lineup.
They're not going backwards. Caleb Williams can't control how many games he plays.
Yeah, but I think, Jay Cutler threw for 3,800 yards in 15 games in 2014.
Oh, we should have just given it to him then.
I agree.
I'll say this, with the quarterback rankings, it's hard to keep Caleb Williams out of the top 5 with what this offense looks like and the way things are trending for him.
I feel like I was going to say almost the exact same sentence with the same words and everything, maybe a little bit fewer words at the end. But yeah, I was thinking it's hard to keep Caleb Williams out of the top 5. He's playing so well. He's got the rushing upside. Doesn't run as much as I'd like for him to, but yeah, I was thinking the same thing. All right, so let's get into top 5 wide receivers for 2026. Jamey, was it easy to put Puka Nacua at number 1 for you?
No. The top 3 guys are excellent, amazing, fantastic. The year that they have all had this season. Chase has been a little disappointing, I think, just given the expectations. When he was the Triple Crown winner last year, led the NFL in receiving yards, receptions, receiving touchdowns. That was hard to expect him to repeat. And then when he loses Joe Burrow in Week 2 with the toe injury. But Puka Nacua, we know when he's healthy, he's among the best wide receivers. This year he's having an unbelievable year. And then we got to see what happens across from him because Devontae Adams, another year older, ending the season with his hamstring injury. Will the Rams bring him back? Will they continue to add to their receiving core? My guess is they run it back just based on how this offense looks, and Adams still under contract. So Nacua still has an opportunity to be that guy for Matthew Stafford. So a lot of things at play there with an older quarterback like we discussed, but it's just hard to overlook what Nacua has done since coming into the league. For the Rams. And then JSN finally getting a guy that can enhance his abilities, and Sam Darnold is that guy. But the offense under Clint Kubiak has been fantastic for JSN. I think all 3 of those guys, if you were to say JSN's 1, okay, cool. Chase 1, great. We know what that's like. Puka, you see what he's able to accomplish. I'm happy to get any one of those 3 receivers. And as Dave said about the running backs, like if you're not sold on Gibbs versus Robinson and you want to sort of pick your draft spot, if you want to get a wide receiver in round 1, maybe you just take that 5 pick and you say, okay, the 2 running backs are probably going to go in the first 5 overall selections. I'll end up with whoever's the leftover of the top 3 and get a better pick in round 2.
Okay, Dave, you want to take a look at your top 5? And I'll ask you the same question. You have Puka at number 1. Was that an easy call for you? You also go Puka, Chase, JSN. And then you have the same top 5 as Jamey, except 4 Lamb, 5 St. Brown. He has 4 St. Brown, 5 CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, Jamey was way too high on Amon-Ra St. Brown and way too low on CeeDee Lamb. I'm just messing around. This was fairly easy to pick a top 3, and I'm taking Lamb over St. Brown because I figure that Dallas's situation will not change that much. They will find another running back, or maybe they'll just re-sign Javonte Williams. Offensive line should still be good. Dak will still be the quarterback. I don't see the defense getting a heck of a lot better. There are too many pieces that they need for that defense to become good. And that means that they're going to be in a very familiar setting where they're going to have to play from behind or be in a bunch of high-scoring shootouts. And give me a receiver like CeeDee Lamb who's not going to be pouty, who's going to routinely get double-digit targets and have him come through. I think he'll have a much better year. Think about how his season started, and then he got hurt. If he hadn't have gotten hurt, I think he would have finished the year as a top 5 type of fantasy wide receiver. And even with the injury, he's going to finish top 10, top 12 in PPR points per game. But Puka should absorb some of the Devontae Adams role if Adams leaves the Rams. That is a possibility, but it's not a definite. And Jamar Chase, we've seen him for years working alongside another stud wide receiver, and he still manages to put up huge points, 19.3 PPR points per game. And think about all that he's been through this year with Joe Burrow being out and the Joe Flacco being in, the whole Jake Browning thing for a couple of games, and he's still been amazing for fantasy managers. So I think it's kind of simple. Like, Nacua makes sense as the number 1, but if you just want to go with somebody who's been steadily one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League with your first pick, Jamar Chase makes a ton of sense to be that guy.
Yeah, Jamar Chase has 20 more targets than Jackson Smith-Njigba in 1 fewer game. He has 20 more targets than Puka Nacua in the same amount of games. That is what you're getting from Chase. You're getting so much target volume. All right, well, the top 5 apparently was easy. I have the same exact top 5 as Dave, basically the same as Jamey. Number 6, not as easy. We're going to save that for another show. I'm looking at my number 6 right now. I absolutely hate who I have as wide receiver 6. I'm going to have to change it. But we have other things to get to, including waiver wire tight ends and the top 5 tight ends for next season when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. You need a tight end for Week 18. We've got your back. We'll also tell you who the top 5 tight ends will be in 2026 right here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. All right, Jamey, let's take a look at the waiver wire. There are often good options in the shallow leagues, the Dalton Schultz, the Juwan Johnsons of the world. Yeah, if someone like Colston Loveland, if they're available, go ahead and pick them up. If not, what are we doing at tight end?
It's actually a good week for a couple of replacement options. You got to take a look at the injury report for one in particular, and that's Jake Tongas taking on what should be a good matchup against Seattle. They've been very bad against tight ends, but it's really contingent on George Kittle, who I'm sure was hoping to play last week against Chicago. We missed out on probably another huge game for him. But Tongas stepped up and played really well. And that was the expectation, at least for me, that just plug and play the San Francisco tight end. Brock Purdy was playing great. Kyle Shanahan was going to still lean on that position, and that is exactly what happened. So I'd be very surprised if they go away from that, especially with a much tougher pass rush that's going to be on Brock Purdy from the Seahawks. So I like the opportunity, if he does start again, to be a borderline top 5 tight end. You look at Michael Mayer, and we saw it last week. It's now 2 of 3 games that we have not seen Brock Bowers on the field, where it's been 15 PPR points or more from Michael Mayer. And this team right now is obviously terrible. You alluded to this, that could the Raiders tank even further and maybe sit Ashton Genty? Well, Michael Mayer is not coming off the field, and Kenny Pickett's going to throw to him a lot. So he's got top 10 upside. And then the next 2 guys are interesting. Colby Parkinson, what we saw last week was, I think, what we were hoping to see the week before, 11 PPR points. That was without a touchdown. Now he's taking on a Cardinals team that he scored against a few weeks ago. They are top 6 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to the position. And if there is no Davante Adams again, we could see another uptick in targets. And again, the game that we needed from him in Week 16, we get it in Week 17. We probably get it in Week 18 as well, depending on how long the Rams decide to play their starters. A.J. Barner without Rashid Shaheed on the field, I think, is not other option that Sam Darnold will lean on. He has touchdown potential, as we've seen. And this San Francisco defense showed us last week in trying to defend Colston Loveland, they can't stop tight ends. So it's a great opportunity for A.J. Barner. He's the one I like the least, but still the upside to be a borderline top 12 tight end for Week 18.
Any disagreements in there, Dave? Anything to mention?
Nothing really. I think it'd be pretty terrible if you're having to go to somebody like A.J. Barner or Chigakonkwo for a starting tight end, but there are crazy deep leagues that are still playing in week number 18. You just got to make sure that Kittle's out before you start Jake Tonjes.
Okay, let's take a look at the top 5 tight ends for 2026. And Dave and Jamey both have McBride 1, Bowers 2. I was thinking about doing an episode at some point of our podcast, a what if episode. What if this had not happened? And I think to myself, what if Brock Bowers hadn't hurt his knee in week 1? Mm-hmm. And what if Kyler Murray didn't get benched? I think it's pretty, realistic that we could have had a huge season from Bowers and he'd be tight end 1 next season. Dave, that being said, I think everyone's going to have McBride number 1. You just have to. But how big is the gap between McBride and Bowers in your mind?
It really comes down to what the Raiders do this offseason, because they're going to make some sweeping changes. Certainly at quarterback, definitely at wide receiver, offensive line, probably head coach, new offensive coordinator. There's a lot that's going to change around Brock Bowers, and that's going to hopefully help him be a lot more exciting as a fantasy tight end. But even as things stand, how do you look at him and say, oh, he's going to stink again? You can't do it. And you can't even say, well, he could be injury prone, this or that. He's just a stud. And Trey McBride is a stud too, but you need him to get volume. If Arizona makes some sweeping changes, and I think they might, especially at quarterback, that changes the tenor for what we expect from McBride, then this is a flip where Brock Bowers goes first and Trey McBride goes second. But at least for fantasy managers, they should go into the offseason expecting those two to be the top 2 at tight end. And frankly, I think they're both worth the pick somewhere in round 2. McBride probably closer to the beginning of round 2, Bowers toward the end of round 2. And then there's 3 rookie tight ends that make up the rest of the top 5. And this is just going back to shooting for upside and certainly hoping for good target volume for each of Harold Fannin, who could be the number 1 target getter for the Cleveland Browns in 2026, Colson Loveland, who could be number 2 for Chicago, and then Tyler Warren. Maybe he's the number 2 target getter for Indianapolis next year. But we've seen some great moments from all 3 of these tight ends. I think Fannin's earned it. He's really played great at the beginning of the year, end of the year. When David Njoku was out, he really took off. And think about the quarterbacks that he played with. If the Browns can solve that position, then holy moly, we could really see Harold Fannin step up into maybe being the best tight end in fantasy football next year.
By the way, 12.5 points per game with Kyler Murray for Trey McBride, 21.8 with Jacoby Brissett. Jamey, let's take a look at your top 5 list at tight end here. And do me a favor, just can you yell at Dave for me for not having George Kittle in his top 5?
I mean, I get it. Look, he's a year older. He's missed more time this season due to injuries. He just always finishes in the top 3 in points per game, and he is number 2 right now, ahead of Brock Bowers, behind Trey McBride. Everybody's behind Trey McBride. But Kittle, just another fantastic season. I think he's still going to be a huge part of what San Francisco does. So for me, there's an easy top 3. Once you get past him, I think that's where you get to the rookies. So Fannin, Warren, Loveland, all those guys are going to be top 10 options. Tucker Kraft was interesting. We're collecting these tight ends. We're collecting the rankings, from our staff. And I believe Heath Cummings and Jacob Gibbs both have, might be mistaken, maybe it's Dan Schneider, have Tucker Kraft in their top 5. I can't get there until I see how healthy he is, but clearly had an amazing season before he went down. He's actually 4th in terms of points per game, PPR points per game, behind McBride, Kittle, and Bowers. So Kraft is going to be in the conversation if he's healthy. But I think when you just look at, as Dave alluded to, there's just a lot of questions, and you brought this up. Kyler Murray is not going to be back as the Cardinals quarterback. Who is going to be the Cardinals quarterback? Is it going to be somebody along the lines of Jacoby Brissett that just gives him these chances to succeed? In the case of Bowers, I think the coach will be back, but the coordinator will definitely change. The quarterback is obviously going to change, and how much of that will impact maybe Bowers in a negative way. We hope it's going to help him, but it could be some growing pains early in the season. Kittle, you know what you're getting. Brock Purdy's going to be back. Kyle Shanahan's going to be back. The running game may not be as good. We saw what that was like for Kittle in 2024. He was an absolute stud when he stayed healthy. So love the upside there for him still. And then the rookies, there are a lot of questions. Who's going to be the quarterback for Tyler Warren? Who's going to be the quarterback for Harold Fannin? Colston Loveland looks like he's going to be in a great spot, but with Odunze healthy, looks like DJ Moore will be back. There's still a lot of mouths to feed. What we've seen from Loveland take off at the end of the season really has been with Odunze off the field. So I think you still have a lot of questions with this position, so it's going to be fun to sort of dissect it. I think if McBride has the right quarterback, he is a slam dunk first-round pick. He's averaging both the numbers you gave, it shakes out to 18.9 PPR points per game. That is obliterating the field. 4 points better than anybody else. It's hard to overlook him as what we used to think about Travis Kelce, Rob Gronkowski. He's going to be a first-round pick for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the magic number, we always say this, right? You really need a tight end to be top 2 on his team in targets, to be top 5 overall at the position. It's almost always the case. There's going to be an exception this year. Jake Ferguson, I guess actually if he could drop out after week 18, but he's currently tight end 3. He could fall all the way to tight end 7 based on how things go this week. But usually you have to be top 2 on your team in targets to be a top 5 tight end. And is Tyler Warren going to be that? Is Colston Loveland going to be that? These are tough questions. I had both of them in my top 5 as well. Actually, I think I had Loveland 6. I had Fannin 4 and Warren 5.
It's pretty crazy that Trey McBride is actually 2 in targets in the NFL.
161 targets, pretty good. Yeah, Kyle Pitts is currently tight end 2. Yeah, I'm sure he made your top 12, right? But it was like, really?
Sure. Yeah,
depends where he plays next year.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, one of our favorite thing to do on this show, so obviously our last show of the year, our last show of the season, is answer your questions. One more round of those when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. Let's see what's on your mind, your questions. Thank you very much for contributing, by the way. Yeah, tight end strategy for next year. Jamey, what do you think?
I think there's going to be a lot of great options. I mean, we just talked about, 3 rookies that could be in the top 5. We still have 3 great options at the top of the list. And then you start to get, is Tucker Kraft healthy? What is this tight end crop going to look like? Because we never really rely on rookie tight ends, and this year's group was great. So I think you can get away with waiting still. So it's going to be, when you get to that spot, Dave likes to say this with quarterbacks, when you don't get to a running back or wide receiver range that you like, and the quarterback's the best available value, take the best tight end that's there. I think you're going to get that again for this season. So I'm not going to reach for anybody, maybe except for McBride if he falls to the end of round 1 or beginning of round 2. We'll see where Bauer settles, but I think it's an easy position to wait for.
Agreed. But if you wait, you're looking at guys like Pitts, Laporta, you mentioned Strange, Ferguson will be in that mix. Maybe Dalton Kincaid is in that mix.
All good this year.
They were all good, but they're not as good as some of those other guys at the top. I might lean toward prioritizing tight end a little bit more than I did this year.
I'll tell you, 2 wide receiver league. I am getting a tight end early. 3 receiver league. I'll see how it plays out. Let's go to our next tweet here. What do we think the top 5 looks like for ADP next year? His best bet is Bijan, McCaffrey. I don't think, my guess is no on McCaffrey. Gibbs, Chase, Puka. And yes, I think McBride will be like 12th, is my guess. Dave, what do you think?
I think McBride will be somewhere between 10 and 15. And I think they've got the wrong 3 letters. It shouldn't be CMC, it should be JSN. But I don't know. People were really ready to take Saquon with a top 3 pick after the year that he just had. I wonder if they'll be just as excited to take McCaffrey. I think it'll end up being a mistake taking him as a top 5 overall pick.
All right, let's go rapid fire here. Let's get a couple more in. Jamey, where do you think Justin Jefferson goes in drafts next year?
Depends on the quarterback. The earliest I would say is round 3.
I'll say late round 2 maybe. Okay, next up is best draft strategy. Jamey, I'll give it to you again for PPR. Go.
Take wide receiver early if you can, but I found getting good running backs early and then just backfilling with wide receiver worked out as well. So a lot of time just to discuss strategy after the draft and free agency happens.
Hero RB worked best for me. And if it's full PPR, obviously finding that hero RB that catches a lot of passes.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Thanks to Dave and Jamey. Happy New Year. Congratulations on your fantasy championships.